This is Walt Disney World Today. Give us 5 minutes and we'll give you the world.
It's Friday, March 1st, 2006, and this is episode number 69 of Walt Disney World Today. I'm Matt Hochberg at MGMstudios.org. On the panel today, we've got Pop Century shareholder Mike Scopa of MousePlanet.com. Welcome, Mike.
Well, you know, Matt, everybody's got a laughing place to go, ho-ho. Take your frown, turn it upside down, and you'll find yours. We know, ho-ho.
I just realized that it's actually the March 3rd show, not the March 1st show. Thanks for pointing this out. Can you tell I read off something? And back again, we've got Mike Newell of Mouse World Radio. Welcome, Mike.
Hi, Matt. How you doing?
Outstanding. And our special guest today is, of course, Jim Hill of JimHillMedia.com. Welcome to the show, Jim.
Well, thank you, Matt.
Like I said, we've got Jim on today's show. And for those of you who don't know who Jim Hill is, I don't know how you found this podcast. Didn't find Jim Hill first. Mentioned it in perhaps. Good or bad. But Jim, why don't you explain? I mean, you're famous. You're, in Disney's words, you're infamous. I mean, you run a site. I mean, you kind of like give the background information on things that a lot of us never knew about. How would you describe your website, JimHillMedia.com?
Well, it's a fairly decent waste of time. I don't know. I just, again, it just, I sort of got sucked into doing this. My ex-wife, Michelle Smith, called one day and said, she was working then with Al Lutz, back when he was doing, what is it, the ADD, what was it, whatever the earliest iteration of Mouse Planet was. Mm-hmm. And she called and said, can you write just one story? It's like, oh, okay, I'll just write one story. And we're now, 7 years later, and I was amazed the other day, I was looking at the site, I've got like 900 some odd stories written, and I think at least 4 or 5 of them are worth reading.
Well, of course, some of our unofficial guide to Walt Disney World fans may recognize Jim's blurbs in the 2006 guide. You contributed some really interesting backstage information, quote unquote, about a lot of the attractions and things that are going on at Disney. And one of the things that I think we all find probably the most interesting is that your knowledge of what's coming down the pipeline. You have an insane knowledge of what's been and what's coming. Not to say you don't know what's going on now, but
Well, you'd have to ask Nancy about that. She thinks I'm pretty unaware. But no, in regard to what's coming down the pipeline, it is just a fascinating time to be watching the Disney company, because right now, what with the acquisition of Pixar, nobody knows what's coming next. That you've literally got the entire Walt Disney World, or the Walt Disney Imagineering management like deer in the headlights. They're terrified about, if I make the wrong move now, does that mean that Lasseter will ask me to leave in 6 months or so? So it's just so many projects that were supposedly in the works are now on hold. In fact, the only things that are, in fact, going forward are things that were greenlit 6 months ago and, frankly, were too far along to shut down.
Well, let's with the last thing that Disney has unleashed upon the public has been Expedition Everest. Mm-hmm. And Expedition Everest is an interesting attraction in how complex it is. Maybe you could tell our listeners a little bit about just what. I mean, that's probably. Certainly that came out. It's going to be opening officially, obviously after Lasseter takes over Imagineering. But can you talk a little bit about Everest and some of the things, the intricacies of it?
Well, there's some. What I find fascinating about Everest is the weird parallels between Expedition Everest at Disney's Animal Kingdom and the Matterhorn at Disneyland. I mean, they both basically served the same purpose. And in 1959, when Walt Disney was just actually finding out that he had competition in the theme park world, he had Pacific Ocean Park opening up. He had places like Pleasure Island under construction in Massachusetts, and frankly, he decided he had to grab the higher ground. He had to get people's attention focused back on the original, on the Anaheim part. And that, in a weird sort of way, is what's happening with Animal Kingdom, that here you have this park that opened that never quite caught on with the public the way they'd hoped. It never met its financials. By 4 o'clock in the afternoon, you could fire a cannon and not hit anybody in the park. Everyone had wandered out and was at Epcot or MGM at that point. And so they needed an attraction, a dramatic attraction to draw attention back to the park. And Joe Rohde wheedled and pleaded and made threats and eventually got $100 million to build this thing. And by God, every dime, that he had was spent on the thing. In fact, to be honest, that there are a lot of people who wish that, he'd gotten, say, another $10 million, because wouldn't it be cool if there were a second Yeti? But, for now, it is what it is. And, it's certainly, it's driving attendance already at that park. And it looks like this combined with what they're doing at the Theater in the Wild in closing that will finally allow DAK to become a park that can actually have a nighttime operation, that can, go well after dusk. And in fact, where that gets interesting is supposedly Steve Davison is already working on that park's first after-hours attraction. That would be a street parade that would be done entirely by lantern light. But again, that's conditional on Everest actually delivering the goods, allowing them to extend the park's operating hours after dark.
Well, when do you one attraction which we're going to get to in a little bit is Stitch's Great Escape. But with Stitch, it's kind of been like, I think we can all kind of say that Stitch hasn't exactly met its expectations either. How long do you give Everest to give okay, it succeeded, or we need to tweak something here?
Well, realistically, you're talking. There's going to be a year's observation from saying April of 2006 to April 2007, and I bet you they'll actually push back the study of the numbers till, say, the fall of 2007, just to get a good enough sampling. But that'll really tell the tale, whether or not it actually does do what they hope and bring a significant number or a larger number of people into the park. I mean, already anybody who's been to the park has noticed that, for example, for the first time ever, Animal Kingdom's parking lot is filling up. And, how many times have any of us been to the park and, you see those first couple of rows filled and that's it. Right. So far, it's doing what they hoped it would do. Now, at the same time, in order for this to work, it also has to sell merchandise. People have to want to buy those photographs, and likewise, then they have to find some place to eat around there, which is why now this sit-down restaurant is going into this part of Asia. But it's a big rock in the pond. It's going to be interesting to see if the ripple effects are actually what Rohde wanted, and then after that, if this is a success, then that allows them further expansion of Animal Kingdom. I know that there have been a lot of ideas kicked around about what phase, the next phase would be. There's been a lot of talk, for example, about, one of the perks of Disney being in business with the Chinese government now is perhaps, getting a set of pandas on loan for a couple of years. Every time, for example, that Busch Gardens Tampa has had pandas, attendance has gone through the roof there. So, it might be nice, the next go-round to have attendance, the attendance rise driven by animals. But at the same time, you've got Narnia, which you could potentially use as, a gateway property that would allow you to revive so many of the ideas that were initially pitched for Beast of the Kingdom. In fact, they're going back and reviewing some of the ideas that were initially pitched for this park. I mean, for example, the Australia walkthrough attraction that would actually be indoors, located inside of an undersized version of Ayers Rock. So,
Jim.
Yep.
I was going to ask about the Tomorrowland. Always seems to me like it's a challenge, and recently I've thought of Stitch, Carousel of Progress, and the Timekeeper as a trinity in trouble. And I was going to ask you if you could comment on what caused the demise of Timekeeper, the rumors we're hearing about Carousel of Progress, and your thoughts on just how long we're going to be dealing with Stitch Escapes?
Well, to be honest, what killed Timekeeper, it was actually, for those of us who saw the show, it was very entertaining. That it was back when having Robin Williams in a Disney thing was something new. I mean, this actually even predated, for Paris anyway, it predated Aladdin. But I hate to say this, but it's kind of a generational thing. I mean, the notion of standing up for 15 minutes to watch a movie in 360 around you for the next generation of theme park goers, that was an awfully long time to stand and do something passive. They wanted to be out doing something. In fact, that's the saddest part about what Imagineering's own market survey work tells them at this point, is that the typical theme park goer doesn't want, it's ironic because Disney fans, all they talk about is, when are they going to do the next Pirates? But what the survey work tells the Imagineers is that people don't want a 15-minute long ride, a boat ride. What they want is a 4-minute long intense experience that they can then immediately walk out of and go on the next 4-minute long very intense experience. So, in fact, that's why we ended up with Mission Space. That was what the market survey said guests wanted. Right. Now, getting back to Tomorrowland, again, it's just, you had to stand up in Timekeeper. You couldn't sit down. You had to lean against things. And that eventually, because we're all old and fat now, just took away from the group of people who want to do that. That coupled with the kids who wanted to go out and be doing something interactive like Buzz Lightyear. So that now is what they're eyeballing about what next to do with Tomorrowland. You've got to create, I mean, yes, you have to please the parents because they're the ones who bring the children and actually have the wallet. But at the same time, you have to be bonding with that next generation of theme park goers. And kids these days, what with, internet and role-playing and, places like VMK, they want interactivity. So they're trying to figure out what to do now with Tomorrowland to appeal to kids.
And your analysis of Stitch, sir?
Hey,
yeah, we don't have enough time to pull it out.
Well, no, it's just, the saddest thing about Stitch is that if you actually look at it, break it down into individual components, the AA figure in it is one of the best they've ever done. I mean, you can actually sit there and watch that thing walk across the platform, and it looks believable. It shifts weight, it moves wonderfully. Likewise, the AA figure in the pre-show that Richard Kind does the voice for, also great fun. The robotic arms, the KUKA arms that are the guns for the thing, also great idea. But individual elements aren't enough to carry a show, and the show, I mean, the audience almost to a man has rejected that show. People walk out of it and it's like, I didn't enjoy it, and it sort of carries over to the same thing that people didn't like about Alien Encounter, being trapped in a chair and sitting in the dark and squinting in the dark to try to figure out what's going on. I mean, they're stuck. They're married to that building. They're married to that technology until somebody finally says, I give. And, they got the building and put something else in there. But for now, they have to keep it on the books for at least a couple of years, so that they can write off the cost. That's sort of why they're looking on the other side of the park now, across the street at both Timekeeper and Carousel, to the effect of, okay, so this is where we'll potentially put our new attractions, because frankly, from strictly a bookkeeping point of view, they're long ago paid for. That they can move money into those buildings, and in a way that a clever bookkeeper can actually write it off on taxes, that sort of thing. And that's why, for example, now you're looking at Timekeeper supposedly being replaced by a new version of the flying saucers from Disneyland from the late 1950s. I know that there's been talk about flying saucers going into the round building that Carousel is in, but frankly, evidently, it's cheaper to put them into the Circle Vision building. And meanwhile, the Imagineers look at the giant piece of property that Carousel is sitting on and the giant piece of property that the old Tomorrowland Skyway Station is sitting on, and are thinking, what can we do with that? What can we put of size in there? What sort of dramatic new attraction that, an E or D ticket that would, drive people into the kingdom? So, while they may shut down Carousel in the next year to 18 months, it may stand literally empty for a couple of years while they figure out what to do to put into that spot.
What about one of the other interesting things that we like to talk about on the show is the future of fast passes. It seems that Disney's been quietly brewing something in the background, and I'd like to hear your thoughts, Jim, on what you thought. Where do you see fast pass in the next few years, whether they're 5, 10, whatever years?
I hate to say it, but I think FastPass is eventually going to shift into a perk that is only available to people who are staying on property in Disney hotels. In fact, based on documentation that I've actually seen, it would be broken down. How many FastPasses you get would depend on what hotel you're staying at. If you're staying in the Grand Flow and up on the concierge level floor, you'd get unlimited FastPasses. If, on the other hand, you were staying at the All-Star, you'd get 3, maybe 4. But you'd have the luxury of, say, pre-booking them. So, over a 12-hour day at the Magic Kingdom, you could get in, various rides at various times. But again, that they were put into the park with the notion that this would then free people up. Because of that virtual queue, they'd then have more time to shop, or they then have more time to eat in Disney restaurants. And as it turned out, that never happened. That the financial return that was supposed to come was never there. So now, in order to get a return on that investment, they've got to shift it over to a resort-type basis. So I would anticipate, within 5 years, it will be out of the park, except if you're staying at a resort. Interesting.
Mm-hmm. One of the other ever-changing parks, we were talking about Animal Kingdom, how it seems, correct me if I'm wrong, Jim, how Animal Kingdom kind of was like, okay, well, they started off with an educational, we're going to do, animals are going to lead the way, and then they kind of said, well, forget this, we're going to have to, we're going to throw in Everest and do something like that. Another park that kind of mirrors that image has been, Epcot, where, again, it goes from educational to, Magic Kingdom number 4 that they would like to build over there. What do you see as Epcot changing in the future?
Well, that's Epcot really. In fact, I have a friend who works at a fairly senior position in Epcot who was telling me about. He was just sort of stunned at what was going on, and that basically what they've decided to do with Epcot is that they're going to shift it away from being the science and discovery park and go with the new motto of the park, just being, family and fun. That what's going on with, for example, Turtle Talk with Crush, or the new Nemo ride-through for Living Seas. That's going to be, the footprint, the model for what they do going forward. And you're going to see more characters folded into this park. One of the more, I personally think, bizarre ideas is taking the River of Time attraction from Mexico and shifting that over to basically a dark ride that's themed around the Three Caballeros. But again, it's one of the things that Disney these days lives and dies by surveys, and what the surveys keep telling them is people come to the parks to see the characters, and in Epcot you just don't see the characters.
It's an interesting theory you got there, Jim, because I look at an attraction like take 2 attractions, Mission Space and Turtle Talk with Crush.
Right.
Mission Space is a behemoth that costs, arms and legs to build. You have to take out, mortgage the company kind of thing. And Turtle Talk with Crush is a low, I don't have numbers to really compare to give you, but you would agree that Turtle Talk with Crush is a far less investment than Mission Space.
Very much. Well, if you're looking at the individual attraction, yes. If on the other hand, you do that wonderful Disney bookkeeping, and you attempt to write off all of the money you poured for decades into development, the notion of creating an environment where a living character can actually talk to an audience, then suddenly you're talking about a lot of money.
Because I'm just
So
thinking,
and at the same time, if you take into consideration that Mission Space is actually underwritten by, why can't I think of the sponsor corporation now?
Hewlett-Packard.
Hewlett-Packard. There you go. That so much of the construction, that sort of thing, was done on Hewlett-Packard's dime. So a lot of this you're talking about is bait and switch.
Because what I guess my point was that, I mean, I know that they invested all this money in Mission Space and everything. You don't think that perhaps they're better off with these smarter attractions? Like, it's not more is, less is more. You know what I'm saying?
Well, one of the other things you have to understand is that you are having a change out in the mindset at Walt Disney Imagineering. For example, one of the reasons they justified putting all of that money into development of Mission Space is this was going to be a franchise. For example, Mission Space, once it was a huge hit at Epcot, was going to travel to Disneyland, and was going to be dropped into Tomorrowlands, around the globe. And the beauty of it was that if you think about it, you've got the 4 centrifuge units. They don't really take up that much space. It's not a huge footprint. And you've already, spent your money to develop the ride and the ride film. So, it was found money. What they just hadn't factored into it is that it would make people sick, and, that coupled with the horrible publicity coming off of the tragic death of that little boy, which, again, at this point has been proven wasn't Disney's fault, but at the same time, sometimes you just get unstuck unfairly with a certain reputation. In this case, Mission Space is now known as the ride that makes you sick, and that killed that little boy, which is why it's going to be one and only now. This is not a ride that's going to be franchised.
So you think,
where you look at Crush, I mean, Crush is going to travel the planet because it works beautifully, anywhere.
Right. Do you see more attractions like that coming down the pipeline? More Turtles Park kind of attractions?
Yeah, they refer to it as the Living Creature Initiative. Lucky the dinosaur grew out of that. There's talk of creating an additional autonomous. Actually, the original name for these things were autonomous walking platforms, and they're looking. The next time they do this, they're going to do a classic Disney character. I've been leaning on them heavily to try to get the name of the classic Disney character, but they haven't coughed that up yet. But no, it's they believe very strongly in this. In fact, they're looking to see if there's a way to take this and translate it to a theater show. Literally, you sit down and you have Donald Duck or Mickey Mouse or that sort of thing come out and talk, and it's clear that they're talking to the audience that's there right now. In fact, if my understanding is correct, the Roz character, for example, at the end of the Monsters, Inc. ride at Disney's California Adventure right now actually makes use of the very same technology as Crush. I mean, people are just sort of floored when Roz, starts heckling people in the car and saying, "Hey, you in the glasses and the purple hat,"
Right.
not realizing that it's, an $8 an hour employee sitting backstage looking into a monitor. So
I just think that, you take that, the investment on those kinds of things, small. The investment in Mission Space, huge. And, you can, I just think you're more likely, if it turns out to be a Stitch, okay, no big deal, not a whole lot of money invested. Whereas, you've got the Stitches, I don't know, but the Mission Spaces, the Everests that have to do well. And if they don't, well, it's still going to be there because sooner or later it's going to, like you said, it's going to cover the cost eventually.
Yeah. And again, I think that's what's always fascinating about the fan point of view. If, for example, now, with Lasseter coming aboard, everyone's talking about, let's get Discovery Bay built, or let's, all of these wonderful old attractions, or wonderful old ideas for attractions. But the reality is that, you have to serve today's market. And for example, today's kids crave interactivity, which is why Crush is such a huge hit with them. The notion of this character I'm looking at from the movie is actually talking to me. So again, you're right. This is the sort of thing that the company will probably be investing in heavily. But at the same time, just because you come up with something wonderful doesn't mean that you can actually get it to work another time. I mean, take, for example, what happened with Star Tours. First time out of the box, simulator married to a film that you move through a themed queue that set up the story, worked brilliantly. Second time, Body Wars, that there was never the audience reaction to Body Wars that came off of Star Tours. And they realized that it's more about the character. It's more about, the setting you're taking them into. If they don't know what going in, they're not going to be as enthusiastic about what they're about to experience.
That's a great point.
It's basically storytelling.
So, no, that's it exactly. And, the problem is, in fact, Iger just this past week talked about how he was at Hong Kong Disneyland watching, a parade go by in September during the opening of that theme park, and realized that he was watching a parade go by where every character that the audience, the group that was lined up there reacted to were Pixar characters that the newer Disney characters didn't react to. And they realized that he basically has admitted that we had a 10-year failure of storytelling. We didn't create one character that these people grabbed onto, whereas Pixar was character after character after character. So, Pixar does what they do well. The storytelling.
You seem pretty high on Pixar.
Well, but there's a problem. Pixar has built its entire rep on storytelling. But one of the things that people at Pixar don't like to talk about is the fact that last year when Joe Ranft died, that tragic car accident, Joe was their story guy. I mean, Joe, he was like, and I was talking with a reporter from USA Today about this a week, 10 days ago, and she pointed out that she's concerned that what's going to happen with Pixar right now is sort of what happened to Disney animated films when Howard Ashman died. There was this wonderful period where Disney had a rebirth of animated films. That great string where it was Little Mermaid and then Beauty and the Beast and then Aladdin. And it seemed like, wow, they're really hitting their stride. And then, it peaked with The Lion King, and then from there was this sudden, slide in quality. And what basically happened is that with Ashman gone, the storyteller, the really good storyteller was out of the building. And the concern is right now we may have a repeat, with Pixar of the Howard Ashman situation. With Joe Ranft dead, the storyteller may be out of the building.
Jim, one of the things that I can recall back in January, I had a breakfast at Bomer's with one of the cast members who would be working at Expedition Everest, one of the lead team cast members, and he leaned over and he said to me something to the effect that he thought that with the technology being so challenging as it is with the Yeti and with Expedition Everest, that there was a possibility that could very well be the Animal Kingdom's test track. Could you comment on that?
Well, that is a genuine concern. I mean, face it, that whole attraction is built around getting an encounter with the Yeti. Right. And, people came off initially during the first, tests in January, February, raving about this amazing figure, how fluidly it moved and that sort of thing. But it is, again, it's the most sophisticated audio animatronic that Disney's ever done, and ridiculously powerful. Like I remember hearing about a stat to the effect of the torque that's produced by this creature, moving back and forth as it swipes at your car going by, is the equivalent of the power that's given off by a 747 upon takeoff. And in order to keep that sort of sophisticated creature, maintained, there's a maintenance schedule. Again, nothing official about this, but supposedly in order to keep that figure in top working form, it involves shutting down the attraction every 3 months, going through the figure, tightening all the bolts, checking, the actuators, that sort of thing, as well as combing out the fur. And, that's, if they can turn that around overnight or over a day or so, that's okay. But, you're going to be using this. I mean, if anybody who's driving on I-4 or 192 has seen the billboards, that's how they're selling this park, and people are going to want to come and see that ride, and particularly see this amazing AA figure. So, for it to be in B mode for weeks at a time, which supposedly it's actually been like that for the last 10 days and 2 weeks.
Could you explain what B mode is?
B mode is actually A mode is active, as in it's activated, it's moving, and it's really impressive when it's moving. B mode is broken. I mean, it just literally defaults to the scariest possible pose, and what they do is they shut off all the theatrical lighting, and they then turn on a fan so the fur is moving, and then the lighting becomes strobe-like. And what's interesting about that is that the strobe, as the train is moving, and with the strobe, it somehow makes you think that the creature might actually be moving, but in reality it's frozen in one position. And again, they need you to be wowed by the Yeti, because you have to step off of the attraction and walk into that gift shop and buy 1,500 pounds of plush.
Of Yetis that aren't actually in the same attraction that you just saw.
That's exactly it. Somebody was telling me actually, again, that there are two stories. One is that they created the white Yeti plush, or all of the merchandise, with the notion that they would then be able to cross-purpose. They'd be able to sell it at DAK and also at Disneyland, in a shop, near the Matterhorn. The other one, and it's a more amusing story, is supposedly that they were so secretive about the creation of the Yeti, the Joe Rohde's team, that they gave the merchandise team a drawing of it, but didn't tell them what color it was. So, here's a black and white pencil drawing of it. They look at it and go, oh, it's white. And proceeded to order all of this, thousands upon thousands of white items. And, it was only when the attraction was open, it's like, it's brown! It's like, ugh! So, I guess we'll know in a year or so if we actually start to see brown Yeti material, filter into the bazaar there. But, again, that's what's fascinating about the Disney company, is every time you think you've got the story, someone else comes forward with another amazing little piece of the puzzle.
Absolutely. Well, Jim, we're out of time today. We're definitely going to have you back, because there's so much that you have over there, and I hope that we'll be able to get you back on a couple times.
No, I'd be glad to come by. I'm always happy to chat.
Great. And of course, Jim's website is jimhillmedia.com. There's all of his columns on there. I mean, you could spend days just reading some of his older stuff and what he's posting there. I mean, every day. It's a great read. I think everyone on this panel would recommend reading it. So, Jim, thank you for being on the show.
It's been a pleasure, guys. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And this is it for us today. This has been episode number 69 of Walt Disney World Today. You can find all older episodes, read our show notes, or send us your comments by visiting the Walt Disney World Today website at www.wdwtoday.com. You can also email us at questions@wdwtoday.com, or line to us to Mike Newell and Jim Hill. I'm Matt Hochberg. We'll see you on the next show.